Story now, the Sahel region of sub-Saharan Africa. They continue to suffer from the effects of increased political instability and amplified geopolitical tensions, among others. According to the 2025 Global Terrorism Index, or GTI, published by the Institute for Economics and Peace, the region accounted for 51% of global terrorism-related deaths in 2024, up from 48% in 2023. The report says the Sahel also accounted for 19% of all worldwide terrorist attacks in 2024, and Burkina Faso remains the most affected country in the region. To discuss this, we are joined on the line by Steve Killelea, founder and chairman of the Institute for Economics and Peace. Steve, thank you for joining us, and welcome to Rise and Shine.
Thank you. So yes, certainly when we're looking at sub-Saharan Africa, what we find is that the global epicenter of terrorism is actually based in the Sahel. But if we look at the overall sub-Saharan Africa, and there are 44 countries we measure there, only 13 of them had a death from terrorism. And in fact, if we look at half the countries, 22 of them, there were no deaths recorded from terrorism over the last 5 years. But what we do see, where the epicenter is situated in the Sahel, we've got Burkina Faso. That's the country which is suffering from the most deaths. That's about 21% of all deaths globally. But it was an improvement on last year. There were less deaths. There were 1,532. But we would caution about the number of deaths being a bellwether of it being improving, because we noticed with Niger, it had a 60% drop 2 years ago, and then the 2 following years increased substantially. So to date, they have the highest number ever.
So let's also touch in terms of the background on the Institute for Economics and Peace and the work that you do.
So the Institute for Economics and Peace is a global organisation. It has offices headquartered in Sydney, Australia, but offices in Nairobi, New York, Brussels, The Hague, Mexico City, and we're currently setting up in the Philippines. And what we do is we focus on metrics to measure peace and then to ascribe economic values to changes in peace. 2 major reports, they're the leading reports in the world in their area: the Global Peace Index, which we recently released, and the Global Terrorism Index, which we're discussing now.
All right, so we have a bit of points in terms of what you found, but how is the Global Terrorism Index compiled?
Well, it's compiled, but we use a set of data which looks at all the various terrorist attacks which have done around the world. And the data set itself goes back about 18 years now, and I think we've got all up over 130,000 different incidents which are coded within it. And what we do is we break it down into 4 different areas which we calculate. That's the number of attacks, deaths, number of injuries, and also the number of kidnappings as well. And we bring them together into a composite index with different weighings for each of those indicators, obviously deaths having the strongest weighing. And then what we do is we take it back over 5 years. So in the year of an attack, it accounts for 51%, following next year 26%, 13%, 7%, and etc. And the reason for that is because the lingering effects which happen from terrorism, because they traumatise communities, and that then has an ongoing effect through those communities.
So we discussed some of the main findings, but what are the primary drivers of terrorism have you found?
Oh, it varies. Generally it comes down to a whole series of issues. So look, if we're looking up in, let's say, the Sahel, a lot of it's really complex. So you've got a lot of social issues, you've got economic issues as well, very, very low per capita incomes. You've got poor governance from the governments. They don't really have control over their areas. You've got polarisation, which you can see with the fighting between different ethnic groups, as you see between farmers and herders. You've got state security abuses, which then aggravate things as well. You've got the pastoralist conflicts. Then you've got transnational jihadists involved as well. And so I think one of the key things, and then you've also got international actors involved. So it's a very, very complex set of circumstances.
You also talk of lingering effects. So what happens in a long term and maybe a spillover from the original points mentioned?
Right. So if we start, well, maybe get more precise. So we're looking and going up into what, let's say, the Sahel. And what we can see is the number of deaths have increased by 10 times since 2019. A large part of that is because of international jihadists getting involved. So the two key ones are JNIM and Islamic State of West Africa. But JIM is on the increase, so we can see the number of deaths have risen by 43% over the last year. Islamic State for West Africa, the number of deaths are down. And so a lot of it is dealing with the interested in capturing resources. Quite often these groups come in and they find a local issue, local grievances, then they take the side of one side and then flame it up and then use it to sort of quite often capture the resources, particularly gold. You've got this large gold belt running through Burkina Faso, Niger and Mali. And so a lot of the time it's about capturing them. But the way the groups operate is they don't actually buy the gold themselves. What they do is they extract money by allowing people to mine the gold, and usually it's groups of individuals rather than an organised organisation. Then they charge the money to be able to transport the gold through the regions. And they do similar sorts of arrangements for guns and drugs as well. And so then they also impose taxes on top of that.
Burkina Faso remains the most affected in the region, as you mentioned before. So what can this be attributed to? Does it mean that those factors you mentioned are worse in Burkina Faso?
Yes, most definitely. Yes, most definitely. I think there's a number of different things going on there. Well, if we look at it, what we can find is that the 9 of the 20 worst attacks globally for terrorism actually occurred in Burkina Faso. And if we looked at the 6 major attacks, 3 of them were in Burkina Faso. At this stage, with ECOWAS pulling out, Burkina Faso are now turning its back on many of the African organisations. It is, however, picking up support from Russia, and China's got steadily improving its influence in there as well. That's particularly related to exploration rights for gold, copper and nickel. So it's a very complex picture. If we went to Mali, for example, we can see the old Wagner group pulling out, but we can now see Africa Corps, which is one of the groups which is associated with Russia, increasing its presence. In fact, it's bringing in, we can see it bringing in armoured vehicles, tanks, heavy artillery as well.
So they may have pulled out of ECOWAS, but in what ways can the establishment of collaborative efforts such as the alliance of Sahel states that they've entered into assist in tackling this issue of terrorism for them?
Well, I think having the alliance is excellent, but the problem is they've got weak governance. They haven't got control over their territories. And so I think they really do need outside support. The support they're getting from Africa Corps is good. That's in terms of sort of fighting the terrorism, but it's probably not going to be enough. We're talking about some hundreds of troops there. I think it might be 300 to 600. And that's hardly enough to fight the level of the insurgencies which they've got.
Is there a willingness for their neighbours to enter into this fight as a form of assistance, or there is fear?
Well, I think we can see it spreading. So if we look at it's spreading more towards West Africa. So if we look at Togo, there were 51 deaths in Togo through terrorism over this period. So yes, the neighbours are fearful. However, without them being willing to be able to accept the help from ECOWAS or the African Union, then it's a debate. We don't know.
And in what ways can the African Union assist in not only Burkina Faso but the Sahel?
I think one would be peacekeeping operations. I think that'd be one way. Two is with military support, and the third one would be with the diplomatic support as well. So there's some of the ways which they'd be able to help them.
Which are some of the terrorist groups that are responsible for the attacks that you found in the index?
So if we're looking at within the Sahel, we find that the worst group is JNIM. The number of deaths caused by JNIM last year increased by 42%. The other major group is Islamic State of West Africa. Now that's the number of deaths caused by it have actually decreased as JNIM has increased. But Boko Haram, obviously off in Nigeria, northern end of Nigeria is part of the Sahel. That's also another hotspot, and Nigeria's sort of got some of the highest conflict deaths in the world. In fact, the number of deaths there were over 3,500 last year. So there'd be the major groups there. If we moved outside of there, Islamic State, obviously was talked about West African chapter, but it had attacks in 22 countries, or was active in 22 countries last year. And that was up from 21 countries the year before. And the other one is TTP, which is active in Pakistan, up in the Boshalan state area.
How have you seen the trend then in terms of the emergence of new terrorist groups? And can you imagine or predict that there'll be even newer groups moving forward?
Yeah, I'm not so much sure about newer groups. What does concern me is we're looking at the drone technology which is being used in, let's say, the war in the Ukraine, and it's incredibly effective. These drones are cheap too, and so as the drone technology now spreads, and we haven't seen it used in Africa to any large extent yet, but like the Ukraine, for example, this year's estimated to manufacture 2.5 million drones. So drones start to now spread, and I imagine over the next 2 years we will start to see them being used and deployed by militias in Africa. That's likely to have a debilitating and compounding effect on conflicts there.
Does Africa have the resources to implement those types of technologies? So it's not so much an emergence of new groups, but this new technology that's emerging.
Well, I think it will come about from a number of different angles. So one is the state and the ability of the state to be able to use drones, and that'll be for reconnaissance, remote attacks and such. The other will be the militias to be able to use drones. And that's more of a concern of mine because many of these drones, they'll be manufactured by nefarious actors in different parts of the world and be sold for fairly cheap amounts. Like you can pick up a drone for some hundreds of dollars, may end up getting sold for some thousands in Africa, but each drone is basically the equivalent of a missile.
All right, the index has noted 51% of global terrorism-related deaths having taken place in 2024. That was a figure that was up from the previous one of 2023 from 48%. Do you expect these figures to further rise?
I think we will see a continuation of the same. I wouldn't predict whether it's going to rise or whether it go up. So it could go down 5%, could go up 10%. But as we're halfway through the year now, my best guess would be somewhat the same.
All right. Well, thank you so much again for your time, Steve.
Yep, look, it's my pleasure being on the show. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Steve Killelea, founder and chairman of the Institute for Economics and Peace. Thank you so much for joining us, discussing that index, the Global Terrorism Index, giving us some concerning figures.